After my wedding ended, I found myself struggling with money. I had a job, but it was only part-time, and I was a waitress at a local diner. My apartment, though not anything luxurious, was proving hard to pay for with my limited salary. Around this time, I started using the Tinder app, hoping to meet some new friends and maybe even date. Funny enough, this app was how I met my ex-husband. One night I was at home checking out the profiles on the app. I was not really impressed with any of the people I saw. Maybe I still had my ex on my mind, or perhaps I was just being too choosy. Then I saw a profile that caught my attention. This guy's name was Bob, and he was a bit younger than me. I always had a thing for older guys, never the younger ones. But Bob's photos were intriguing. There was a picture of him on a beautiful beach with powdery white sand, another in the busy streets of New York, and one where he was standing in front of a fancy private plane. It might sound a bit materialistic, but those photos made him stand out. I swiped right on Bob's profile, and that was the only one I did that evening. After that, I decided it was time to sleep. Morning came, and the first thing I did was to check my phone. I saw that I had a match on Tinder. It was Bob, of course, since he was the only one I had shown interest in. He had already sent a message. It was a simple, "Hello." I always believed that if someone wanted to initiate a conversation, they should at least try to make it more engaging. But I responded, and soon we were chatting away. It didn't take long, maybe just a few exchanges, and Bob asked if I wanted to go out. I agreed, and we set the date for the upcoming Friday. We dined in an upscale restaurant, much fancier than what I would have picked. Bob was a bit odd. Somehow he felt out of place. Our conversation was okay, but there were moments when neither of us knew what to say. But it was our first time out together, so a little awkwardness was to be expected. When it was time to pay, I was worried. I wasn't sure if he would expect me to chip in, and I knew I couldn't afford such an expensive meal. My worry was short-lived when Bob quickly took the bill and paid without any fuss. After the meal, I headed home using public transportation. In the following weeks, Bob and I went on several more dates, and each time it felt like he was going overboard trying to impress me. He clearly had plenty of money and seemed eager to show it off, taking me to lavish places. One time, he surprised me with tickets for a luxurious river cruise. I was stunned. This must have cost him a fortune, especially since we weren't even officially a couple. While I appreciated his generosity, I couldn't help but feel it was a bit much. And then one day things escalated even more. Bob sent me a message asking if I wanted to join him for a vacation in Mexico. The idea of going to Mexico with Bob seemed exciting, but deep inside I wasn't ready for such a big commitment. My intuition was telling me something was off, so I decided it was best to end things and sent Bob a text message to explain my feelings. Not long after, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Bob. When I picked up, he unleashed a flood of angry words. It was like a switch had been flipped. He wasn't the polite Bob I had dated. He was furious, and his words were so hurtful. I tried to listen, but his yelling was too much. So, I turned off my phone, trying to shut out the negativity. I remembered he had dropped me at my place a couple of times, and it made me uneasy knowing he knew where I lived. When I dared to turn on my phone the next day, there were many missed calls and a bunch of messages from Bob. Each message was filled with anger and blame. I thought ignoring him might be the best approach, but a few days later I thought maybe talking to him might help him understand. So I called. But again, the conversation quickly turned to shouting. Bob even said I owed him money for all our fancy dates. Given my tight budget, I knew I couldn't pay him back. So I ended the call. The next evening at work, I couldn't shake off my worries about Bob. I feared he might take some drastic steps, especially for money. Finishing my shift around 1 a.m., I headed home. But as I reached my front door, a feeling of dread washed over me. It was slightly ajar. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside and shouted, "Is anyone there?" There was only silence. A quick look around confirmed my fears. Someone had been in my apartment. My heart raced as I went to my room and found a note on my bed. It read, "Watch your back." Terrified, I rushed out and stayed at a friend's house for the night. Early next morning, I reported everything to the police. With my statement and the evidence from my home, they arrested Bob. During the investigation, they found out Bob was actually drowning in debt. All those lavish dates were funded by multiple credit cards, and he was nearly bankrupt. A few days later, I stumbled upon a documentary on TV about men luring women with extravagant gifts and dates, only to trap them in a cycle of debt. It all clicked. Bob probably had a similar plan for me. It made sense why he was so insistent on me paying him back. Luckily, I never had to deal with Bob again. This experience was a wake-up call. I became more cautious, especially with online dating. It reminded me of something my grandma used to say, "If it sounds too good to be real, it probably isn't." I used to work in a tiny ice cream store when I was just a bit older than a teenager. That's where I bumped into one of the coolest people I know. Her name was changed to Mary, and she was just a bit younger than me. It felt like I was her older sister sometimes. We really loved working at the same time, mostly during the later hours because the people who'd been working there for a long time got to work during the day. Now, this little shop was super busy at certain times, mostly when a movie ended. Why? Because there was a big cinema really close by, and loads of people would come to our shop after watching a film. These busy moments were our time to chat about stuff, all the silly and serious things happening in our lives. Back then, I had a boyfriend I'd been with since we were in school, so honestly, I had no clue about those dating apps everyone talked about. But Mary? Oh, she was on a bunch of them. She was tall, had golden short hair, and was a bit on the curvy side. Most of the time, she was on this app called Tinder. She'd show me the guys she matched with and the sometimes weird messages they'd send. One day, while we were just hanging around at work, she showed me a chat with a new guy she'd matched with. His new name was Jack, and he was about to hit 30. Jack had somewhat long dark hair, a bit of a beard, and he wore glasses. Honestly, he looked way too good, like someone from a magazine. My first thought, is this guy for real? But I didn't want to be negative, so I said nothing. Mary told me they were meeting up the very next night. I told her to have fun, gave her a thumbs up, and we went on with our work for the evening. When our shift ended, I went home and decided to call her the next night, around the late hours, to check in on their date, but she didn't pick up. I thought, maybe it's going really well, and I headed to sleep. The evening after that, we were scheduled to work together again. I was super eager to hear all the juicy details, but when I arrived, Mary wasn't there. She was always on time, so I was confused. I tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. I didn't know her family's number, so I felt stuck. After waiting for what felt like ages, I couldn't just stand there doing nothing, so I dialed the cops. The officer told me that Mary's mom had already reported her missing. She hadn't come home from that date. Days turned into weeks, and there was just silence. No news about Mary. Working in that shop without her was tough. I kept thinking about her all the time. Her mom and I kept talking, both of us growing more annoyed with the police because they seemed stuck. More time passed, and I was more than just annoyed. I was scared and angry. I needed to take some action, so I hatched a plan. I created my own Tinder account and put up some cute pictures of me. I couldn't forget Jack's face from that time Mary showed me. Even if that wasn't his real picture, I felt like I had to give this a shot. I took a deep breath and began looking through the app. Swipe left again and again. I was focused on one thing only, finding that guy who Mary had gone out with. After what felt like forever, but was probably only an hour, I stumbled upon a familiar face. The profile said his name was Jake, but I remembered it as Jack. Taking a few seconds to steady myself, I swiped right, hoping he'd match back. I tried distracting myself with other things, but later in the day when I checked the app, a notification popped up saying I had a new message from Jake. A whirl of emotions filled me, a mix of fear, hope, and anxiety. This might be the lead to find out where Mary was. With a shaky hand, I sent a flirty response. I might have gone overboard, but I really wanted him to stay interested. A few messages later, Jake suggested we meet up for a coffee. I said yes without hesitating. The next evening, we were meeting at this small cafe I'd never been to before. Walking in, I had to blink back tears when I saw him sitting at a dimly lit corner table. He looked just like the photo. Swallowing hard, I plastered on a fake smile, even though my stomach was doing flips, and sat opposite him. For the next hour, we chatted. I steered clear of Mary's topic, even though her disappearance was the talk of the town. With every word he spoke, I became more and more convinced that he had something to do with Mary's absence. I hadn't planned this far ahead. I had just wanted to meet him and see if he'd let something slip. The evening stretched on, and after a while, Jake suggested we head to his apartment. I made up an excuse, got up, and almost sprinted out. Once I was safely outside, I pulled out my phone and called the police. I managed to connect with the officer handling Mary's case and filled him in on everything, hoping he'd understand my suspicions about Jake. The officer was supportive and took my information seriously. He promised to look into Jake further. A few days later, news broke out. Jake had been arrested. The shocking bit? He confessed to harming Mary in a fit of anger. The police were able to find Mary, and the entire town was in shock. I still work at that ice cream place, and every day is a reminder of the dear friend I lost. Knowing the truth brings some solace, but the pain remains. I was a guy in my mid-30s, and this is a story from when I was about 30. I always found it tough to talk to girls because I was kind of shy. I did try going out with my buddies when I was younger, but big groups of people and loud places made me feel uneasy. I really didn't like places like dance clubs. So because of this, it wasn't easy for me to get to know new girls. I'm kind of tall and in okay shape. People these days like to look at photos first, and I guess in photos, I looked okay. I'd rather someone like me for how I look than how awkward I sometimes feel. I was on a dating app, OkCupid. There I started chatting with a super pretty girl named Jenny. She was so gorgeous, like someone you'd see on TV or in magazines. I was amazed she wanted to talk to me. We chatted every evening for about 2 weeks. Then Jenny asked if we could meet up in person. I thought maybe we could grab a bite to eat, but she invited me over to her house instead. I should have thought it was weird, but I said yes. I was nervous but excited. When it was time to meet, I hopped on a bus and headed to Jenny's address. I was expecting a fancy place, but instead I saw an old house that looked like it had seen better days. It was just one level, with a big garage. The house was painted a light blue, but some parts were falling off. The roof looked like it needed some fixing too. All the lights were off, and I wasn't even sure if I got the right house. I texted Jenny to double-check if this was really her house. She quickly replied, saying I should enter through the garage. I looked over and saw the garage door was a bit open at the bottom. I could probably slide through without much effort. My gut told me to be careful, but I really wanted to meet Jenny, so I went to the garage. As I got closer, I bent down to look inside. There was a dim light and the garage was empty, no car or anything. But as I squeezed in, I saw something scary. A man with a mask stood at the far end, holding a knife. As soon as he saw me, the garage door began to shut, and he started rushing towards me. I quickly got back on the ground, slid out, and narrowly avoided the closing door. I ran as fast as I could. After a while, I saw a Dunkin' Donuts with lots of people. I felt safer there. When I had calmed down, I thought about going to the police, but I was ashamed that I got tricked, and also a bit embarrassed about using a dating app. So, I kept quiet. A year later, I saw on the news that another person had a scary encounter at that same house. They weren't as lucky as me. Even today, I feel bad about not telling anyone. Maybe I could have helped.